What if there was no Islamic regime change in Iran? Tehran, January 1979. In our reality, the Shah fled Iran as millions took to the streets demanding his overthrow. But in this alternate timeline, the uprising buckled under the weight of brutal precision and global calculation. The Shah, battered by cancer but propped up by the CIA and Savak, ordered a sweeping crackdown. Tanks rolled through central squares. Key opposition clerics vanished overnight. Ayatollah Khomeini, still exiled in Paris, never made it to Tehran. His plane blocked, his return delayed into irrelevance. Western media briefly decried the violence, but oil prices steadied, and embassies breathed sighs of relief. Washington called it stability. By March, the protests were scattered, the mosques silenced, and the monarchy, though cracked, still held the crown. Iran had sidestepped the Islamic Revolution and stepped into a different storm entirely. Survival reshaped the Shah. Once distant and decadent, he returned to public life cloaked in military resolve. He gave fiery speeches framed in nationalism, not westernization, and declared a new Persian century. Behind the podium, the monarchy was still riddled with fear. But it had teeth again. Savak's powers expanded. Universities were purged. Revolutionary guards never formed because the revolution never won. But it wasn't just repression. It was reinvention. The Shah began courting nationalist youth groups, blending secular pride with iron-fisted rule. He rebranded himself not as the West's puppet, but as the bulwark against chaos. The West didn't ask too many questions. Oil flowed, and the Cold War calculus held. Iran was now a pressure cooker, sealed shut, simmering hard, and ruled by a man racing both time and his own mortality. From a rented house in Neauphle-le-Château, Ayatollah Khomeini watched the window of history close. His taped sermons, once smuggled into Iran by cassette and copied in secret, now fell flat. The networks that once carried his words were dismantled or silenced. His followers, leaderless and hunted, went underground or fled. Western journalists stopped showing up. Intelligence reports labeled him a spent threat. By 1980, he was still giving interviews, still issuing fatwas, but the world had moved on. His name lingered like smoke, once feared, now fading. Tehran painted over his slogans. Paris let his visa expire. In this reality, Khomeini died a scholar in exile, not the supreme leader of a theocratic republic. His revolution became a footnote, a warning, a ghost. At Langley and Foggy Bottom, the mood was one of restrained relief. The Shah's survival was not just a diplomatic victory, it was a Cold War stabilizer. The Carter administration, battered by global unrest, now pointed to Iran as a case of mature leadership under pressure. Deals resumed. Arms flowed in under the radar. F-14 Tomcats, surveillance gear, riot equipment. Human rights concerns were quietly shelved. Behind closed doors, the CIA debriefed Savak and offered strategic support, eager to ensure this miracle of control didn't unravel. But not all in Washington were convinced. Some warned that repression breeds resistance. Others whispered that the Shah was simply postponing an explosion. But for now, oil was cheap, communists were contained, and Iran was once again the keystone in America's Middle Eastern architecture. A brittle, blood-soaked keystone no one wanted to examine too closely. With Khomeini exiled and the uprising crushed, the Shah turned his gaze inward, toward the mosques. The regime launched what it called a national cleansing initiative, aimed at removing politicized clergy from public life. Hundreds of mid-level clerics were arrested, seminaries shuttered, religious charities absorbed into state-run ministries. Friday sermons were monitored, edited, or outright replaced by state-approved imams. Some cooperated, exchanging dogma for survival. Others vanished. The once sacred alliance between the mosque and the community fractured under the boot of the monarchy. In rural Iran, dissent simmered in whispers. In Qom, scholars wept behind closed doors. Religion was not banned, but it was hollowed out. And for every mullah silenced, a generation learned to pray in anger and in secret. Flush with renewed Western backing, the Shah launched a grand national facelift. Highways cut across deserts. Skyscrapers rose in northern Tehran. Western banks opened branches on Pahlavi Avenue. A new class of technocrats, foreign-educated, sharply dressed, fluent in the language of oil and capital, became the face of modern Iran. But beneath the glass and concrete, resentment curdled. The wealth gap widened. Rural communities saw no roads, no banks, no promises kept. The Bazaris, once loyal to the monarchy, felt alienated by imported consumerism and new taxes. The illusion of prosperity played well on the international stage. Time magazine ran a glowing cover, Iran Rising. But the poor still queued for bread. And the whispers that once came from minarets now found refuge in basements, books, and bitter jokes. The palace looked taller than ever, but the ground beneath it was beginning to shift. By the early 1980s, it wasn't the clerics but the Marxists who re-emerged from the shadows. Groups like the Tudi Party and the Fedayeen, once fractured, found new life among students and factory workers disillusioned by monarchy and Western capital. Savak tried to stamp them out. Detentions, disappearances, controlled leaks. But ideology is harder to kill than men. In university campuses from Shiraz to Mashhad, the language had changed. Not theology, but class struggle. Pamphlets once banned returned under new covers. Graffiti read, "The Shah serves dollars, not Iranians." Moscow watched carefully, funneling subtle support while avoiding a repeat of Prague or Budapest. The West, too distracted by Afghanistan, failed to notice the tide turning. As the Shah's illness worsened and his grip faltered, Iran wasn't drifting into theocracy. It was inching toward a different revolution. One wrapped not in black robes, but in red flags. In 1982, pale and visibly frail, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi made his last public address. Sitting stiffly beneath a grand portrait of Cyrus the Great, he spoke of legacy, unity, and destiny, but not succession. "I have served Iran with all my strength," he said. "Let history decide the rest." The carefully edited footage showed no audience, no applause, just the quiet echo of finality. Behind the scenes, the court scrambled. Crown Prince Reza was young, inexperienced, and tainted by Western grooming. The military was loyal, but fractious. Savak, once omnipotent, had grown bloated and paranoid. As the Shah faded, the state became a hydra. All heads, no heart. The monarch who had survived revolution had no plan for after. The real reckoning was only beginning. When the Shah died in July 1983, there was no national mourning, only silence and unease. His funeral, opulent and heavily guarded, was broadcast live but sparsely attended. The Crown Prince, now Shah Reza II, took the oath with trembling hands before a parliament filled with skeptics and opportunists. Riots flared in Tabriz and Avaz within days. The oil workers in Abadan went on strike. Army units hesitated to follow orders. Savak issued urgent memos, warning of coordinated subversion. Foreign embassies quietly activated evacuation protocols. Tehran was no longer a city of monuments and glass towers. It was a city waiting for something to give. And in dark corners, both Marxists and clerics began whispering the same word again: revolution. As unrest deepened, Iran's armed forces, once the backbone of monarchical power, began to fracture. The old guard, loyal to the late Shah, pushed for martial law. Younger commanders, shaped by urban unrest and exposed to revolutionary ideas, hesitated. In the barracks of Kermanshah and the airfields of Isfahan, whispers of dissent spread through the ranks. Some officers defected quietly, others sabotaged orders or passed information to underground networks. Savak's response was ruthless, but clumsy. Show trials backfired. Executions bred martyrs. And in a stunning blow, a mid-ranking general defected live on Voice of the Nation radio, denouncing the monarchy as an engine of misery. The regime, once able to command with a gesture, now found itself begging for loyalty it could no longer buy. By the winter of 1983, the illusion of order collapsed. Protesters flooded the streets. Students, workers, clerics, leftists, no longer separate but united by rage. The capital became a battlefield. Barricades rose in front of the University of Tehran. Petrol bombs lit up government buildings. The Royal Guard fired live rounds into crowds chanting, "Down with the peacock throne." Even parts of the bazaar, once a monarchy stronghold, turned on the regime. In response, tanks rolled down Engelab Street. But it was too late. The city wasn't afraid anymore. Inside the royal compound, Shah Reza II huddled with advisors, demanding control. "Give no ground," he ordered. But Tehran was already slipping away, not to one faction, but to many. The streets had become a parliament, and every chant was a vote. As the monarchy crumbled, there was no single force ready to claim the throne's remains. Iran fractured not into order, but into currents. The Marxists declared a People's Council in Tabriz. In Mashhad, conservative clerics re-emerged from hiding, calling for an Islamic restoration without Khomeini. Ethnic minorities in Kurdistan and Khuzestan seized the moment to demand autonomy. For a brief, volatile month, Iran became a nation of republics within a republic, each waving its own flag, playing its own anthem. The West held its breath. Moscow eyed the vacuum. And within Tehran, rival militias began forming from the wreckage. Red banners clashing with black turbans in alleys that once sold perfume and pistachios. The revolution had come, but unity had not. The collapse of the monarchy and the chaos that followed drew global attention like blood in the water. The CIA scrambled to secure oil infrastructure and protect embassy staff, quietly funneling arms to pro-Western factions in the south. Meanwhile, Soviet advisors slipped across the northern border, embedding with Marxist cells in Tabriz and Rasht. Iraq eyed Khuzestan hungrily, claiming ancestral ties. Israel watched with wary calculation. And the Saudis, fearing a sectarian firestorm, began covert funding of loyalist tribal networks in the southeast. Iran was no longer a sovereign state. It was a chessboard. But this time, there was no grandmaster. Only opportunists, each moving their pieces across a land unraveled, hoping to shape the next chapter before anyone else could write it. In late 1984, a provisional government was hastily declared in Tehran, not by the people, but by a coalition of technocrats, business elites, and defecting royalists. Led by a former oil minister with Western ties, it promised elections, stability, and a new chapter for Iran. Foreign powers applauded, but on the ground, few listened. The provisional cabinet ruled from a fortified hotel, protected by mercenaries and surrounded by sandbags. Outside, the real power lay with armed militias, student groups, and rival imams issuing conflicting fatwas over shortwave radio. The so-called briefcase republic lasted just 73 days before collapsing under its own weight. Its leaders fled through diplomatic back channels. The vacuum returned. Tehran remained a capital without a country. By the end of 1985, Iran no longer resembled a country. It was a landscape of ruins and flags. The monarchy was a memory, the theocracy never born, and the republics all broken before they began. Cities like Shiraz and Esfahan became microstates. Foreign influence ran deeper than language. Borders blurred, and oil flowed through black markets rather than pipelines. Some called it the Lebanese model. Others called it Balkanization. But for Iranians, it was simply loss of sovereignty, of voice, of identity. The revolution that never happened left a deeper scar than the one that might have. In this alternate timeline, Iran didn't fall into clerical rule. It fell into fragmentation, and the echoes of what it could have been haunted every prayer rug, every ruined embassy, every child born into silence. Like and subscribe for more from History Twist. Leave a comment below to request your own what-if video. See you soon for the next video.